Welcome to another session. I hope you are well. Today I am going to be speaking as a continuation on a theme and a topic that I began 2 sessions ago, which had to do with a man's value. Now, in the first session I provided an overview, which I expanded on in the second session by addressing and talking about a man's sexual marketplace value. Now, if you haven't seen the prior 2 sessions, I would recommend you start from those, because I will be building on the 2 sessions that I have covered so far. Brick by brick, perhaps we might get this building completed. I'd like to apologize if I, for whatever reason, sneeze or cough. I'm dealing with some other things that come naturally, just feeling slightly change of weather and being exposed to the elements. So, but in any case, I must continue. Apologize because I was not able to do a session in the last 2 days as I normally would. Sometimes you're busy and sometimes the body keeps the score, and you have to listen and learn and embrace. So welcome back, and let's get today's session started. My hope and my intention from today is to communicate an idea that is not necessarily original, an idea that is not new, but an idea that perhaps I can share and I can present in my own way, based on my experiences, based on my own opportunities, also based on living vicariously through the lives of other people. When we talk about value, there is a huge misconception, especially by those who do not understand, you might say, the colloquial meaning of the word value. Very quickly people attribute the word in a manner that is moralistic. They provide and put forward value judgments. I take a different approach. I bring in some of my experience from finance and investing, and I use examples that most people can relate to. We all live in buildings, we all drive cars, and so it's much easier to understand using, you might say, examples that we see in our day-to-day lives, and we can use that as a functional comparison to a topic that might emote beyond what is necessary. In the sessions that I started, I am not referring to you as a man in terms of your value as a, you might say, as a citizen or as a national. I'm not discussing your value to your community or your nation. I'm not discussing your value to your family. I'm not even discussing your value to, let's say, if you believe in such, a transcendental. I'm talking about the marketplace with regards to sexual dynamics, more specifically dating and marriage or relationships. I distinguish very carefully, and I should say this before I begin today's session, I distinguish 2 separate marketplaces when it comes to intersexual dynamics. Dating marketplace, where people go to for sometimes short or medium-term goals and desires, satisfaction, gratification. And then the main marketplace, which is marriage and relationships, where people go to for longer-term commitment and fulfillment, wherever and however they define that. Therefore, when we talk about a value of someone, it would be remiss of me not to distinguish what that value might be in both marketplaces. The session I did previously, when I talked about SMV, sexual marketplace value, I made a clear distinction about how the standards of measurement the valuation tools, as I call those, are the same for men and women. So when we say a woman's sexual marketplace value, we're talking about her physical appearance in her natural state. Height, weight, height to weight ratio, height to waist ratio, or you might say height adjusted weight. We look at things such as her face, her natural beauty, shape of her nose, her eyes, mouth. We look at things such as her physique, proportionality. There's several things we look at to come up with a value. But the heuristics used by most people is simply attractiveness or appearance. The same standards apply when judging men. So a woman will look at a man and say, I find him attractive. Now, she might not explain in a scientific methodology, as I am, but she might just simply say, he's tall, dark, and handsome. We know about the sixes, 6 feet, six-pack. There are things that women use or judge with. I want clean teeth. I want a tall, handsome man, broad shoulders, large chest, lovely biceps, nice hips, 6 inches down there. Sexual marketplace value, physical appearance. Today's session, however, I move into what I call the non-sexual marketplace value, NSMV. I should have said this at the start. Today's session might be a long session, so I apologize. I might, in any case, separate it into 2 sessions so it's digestible. But I think this session, NSMV, in my opinion, is the most important of all of the valuation techniques or tools or matrices that people use in evaluating a man's value. And more importantly, how men can start to reappraise their value and how they can appraise the value of other men. Interestingly, how women can make distinctions between men by applying a much better way of assessing a man's non-sexual marketplace value. The sessions that I did previously, years ago, I covered what non-sexual marketplace value is. I will not have the time to go through the same definitions and explanations, but suffice it to say as follows. Sexual marketplace value deals with your appearance and how you present yourself, but more fundamentally, how attractive you are. It's very physical, it's very primal, you might say so. Men are very visual, so we judge women based on what we see first, before we get to know them. In the West, there have been changes that have taken place, such that women are starting to judge men through the lens of a man. So, men were previously resource and success objects. Women were seen by men as sexual objects, inspiration objects, objects of motivation, and we judge her by her presence. So women these days are judging men by similar methods. Non-sexual marketplace value covers so many things. When I spoke about women, I use examples such as integrity, attitude, feminine presence and femininity, awareness of her womanhood, awareness of whether she was trained to be a wife. I looked at things such as servant spirit. All of those apply to men. We just apply the functional equivalent. Integrity, you might say morality, if that's important to you. Value system, if that's important to you. Manhood, character, behavior. Whether he was raised or trained to be a husband, whether he was raised and trained by good men, whether he had influences around him. Etiquette, mannerism, decorum, chastity, chivalry, all of these fall under the umbrella of non-sexual marketplace value. Very important. A man can be attractive, but if he lacks all of the other qualities that are non-sexual, it would be wiser for a woman to discount that man on the basis that he does not have the qualities of a real man. I hope you can see, therefore, that there are similarities in how the non-sexual marketplace value is used to assess men and women. Very similar. What I would like to do today, however, because I can spend a long time discussing non-sexual marketplace value, I want to pick up on something that I think perhaps is the most important across the non-sexual marketplace value bucket list. I'm going to be speaking about manhood value. Manhood value. The manhood value sits underneath what I'll call the non-sexual marketplace value. It should sit on its own. However, the womanhood value sits underneath the woman's non-sexual marketplace value. So we apply similar approaches. What is a manhood value, or what is a man's manhood value? Now, let me put this in a way that perhaps could be easy to understand. A woman can judge a man based on his sexual marketplace value. In other words, how attractive he is. And she says, he's a 5, he's a 6, he's a 7, he's a 9, he's a 10. A man can judge a woman based on womanhood. And he can say, based on her various qualities, she's a 5, she's a 6, she's a 7, she's a 9, she's a 10. A woman should do the same in judging a man. And in doing so, she uses his manhood value. Similarly, men should judge a man based on the same standards. Now, I'm going to speak about manhood value, and it's important that I start by saying two things. You don't have to agree to my position about such matters. Don't reject it, don't accept it necessarily, but I hope you do not neglect it. I think this is key to success. When a woman decides to choose a man, if I could instruct or sit with a woman and she said to me, what one quality do I need to use in choosing the right man? I would say manhood value. If I met a group of men and they said, there are a few men who I know, but who can I trust? Who can I use as bring into my inner circle? I would say the same thing, manhood value. In business, people talk about intelligence, integrity, and enthusiasm, or energy. And there is a saying that what you want if you're choosing a business leader is someone who has integrity first. Because if they have enthusiasm or energy, but lack integrity, then they could do a lot of damage. But if the person has low energy, but it still has integrity, you can still compensate for the fact that the person's words will be their actions, or their actions and their words will be congruent. Many times we choose people who look good, but are awful people internally. Manhood value is key. Now, it would be remiss of me to talk about manhood value as a blank word applying to all people. I cannot do that. And the reason being, I talk about two separate groups. And when it comes to dating and relationships, one of the first things I say to people, you have to choose your poison. Let me say that again. You have to choose your poison. The world is changing. There was a time when we were isolated as a nation, and people didn't travel as much. Technology and the development, the convergence of several technologies has made the world into one place. Social media has accelerated that process and exacerbated that process. And what this simply means is that there are parts of the world that are fully developed. They are called developed countries. And there are those that are still developing, and they are called underdeveloped or developing countries. Abraham Maslow had something that I think is crucial in instructing how this works. It's called the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Abraham simply said, at the bottom of the hierarchy is the need for protection, safety. This is our physiological needs. We're concerned about safety food, water, shelter, basic. Without food, water, shelter, we don't bother ourselves with other things. Once we get past that physiological needs, we move up to what we call the safety needs, protection, and other things, safety needs. But once we have our physiological needs and safety needs met at the core, we move to the next stage called love and belonging. We want to feel as though we're part of something bigger than ourselves. We want friends and we want intimate relationships. Now, if we can get that, then the next thing we then focus on ourselves, self-esteem, and we start moving from self-esteem towards the pinnacle, which is self-actualization. Those who we call developed countries are those who have already solved the issue about physiological and safety needs in the main. In the West, we don't have wars like we used to. The current escalation between two countries notwithstanding. But we do not have wars like we used to. We're relatively safe because we're relatively educated. So what you find in the West is that the need most people have is not even love and belonging, despite it being absent. It's more that people are focusing on self-esteem so much more on self-actualization. This simply means that the need for survival is out the window. Whereas if you were to go to parts of the developing countries where they're still poor, they focus more on safety and their physiological needs. Food, what do I eat today? Now, I grew up and I was raised by incredible parents, incredible father, incredible mother. But I know, despite all of the great things we were given, character, morality, and all of that, there were times when we couldn't eat a lot. And I can tell you this, it's a luxury in the West. A few days ago, I was having a conversation and something came up. And I think a lot of men might relate to this depending on where you are in the world. And what came up was a topic about fasting. And there was a case being made for fasting, and I support it completely. I think it has great physical benefits, and you can reset your immune system. You go into something called autophagy, and you can actually reset an autoimmune disease just by fasting. You can actually increase your testosterone as a man just by fasting, just by extending the hours. You go from 15 hours to 17 hours to 24 hours to, sometimes if you can extend 48 hours to even 72 hours, and you have a complete reset. Now for women, it plays a huge role. Helps with fertility, and even more great things. But as the conversation continued, I said, you have to understand that if you were born poor, and if you were raised in a way that there were days when if you had one meal in a day, you were happy, then the concept of fasting is a luxury for someone who has nothing, because they don't have anything, so all they care about is food and survival. But for someone who has everything and who lives in the West, fasting becomes a luxury that they can afford. It's a first world problem. I said all of that to simply state that depending on where you are, you might subscribe to the traditional or to the modern approach to some of these concepts. The modern approach deals primarily with places in the West, parts of the Anglosphere. Traditionals are those where you can still see elements of conservative values, sometimes based on the fact that they are still at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. In any case, when it comes to intersexual dynamics, whatever you want, whether you're dating or whether you want something that is more lasting, like a marriage or relationship, you first have to decide, choose your poison. Do you want to choose the traditional pathway towards relationship or the modern pathway towards relationship? Those who try to mix and match always blunder after a number of months, years, and over time. Depending on which you choose, what you might find, and this is where I start the Manhood Value teaching or conversation. Now, sit up straight. This is where I might go hard on some of the men, and I hope women can understand men more from this session. You've heard me talk about the 4 Ps: provision, protection, the priestly duties, and professing his love. That's how those are core responsibilities of men. For many years, in the traditional sense, under the traditional umbrella, a man is judged based on his ability to provide and protect, fundamentally. So what we say, well, what is a man's value? Manhood value, provision, protection. If he can provide, that's it. That's all he has to do. In the modern West, because we've solved the issue about safety and our physiological needs, what you find is the emancipation of women, the suffragettes movement, and the empowerment that women have been granted, not because they didn't deserve it, but because they should never have been denied of such rights, has allowed women to come into the marketplace such that we used to have traditional roles. Women played certain roles and men played certain roles. And what we've done is we've opened the gates where women can choose. They're free to choose. But men have been stuck in a way that society viewed them for centuries. Provision protection is still what is used, irrespective of whether you are in the modern or whether you're in the traditional umbrella or have a traditional preference. But women, because they've been emancipated, a woman does not need a man for provision. She can make just as much and even more. Women are killing it, you might say, from a provision point of view. The states in the West, we talk about state, we say we're referring to the government, is providing so much support. And women, generally speaking, the ones who consume the most of the welfare state, or make up most of the welfare obligations. And so provision can come either from her efforts through productivity, or it can come from her demands by requesting that the state give her what she wants. So provision is out the window. Protection is also out the window because protection comes most of the time as a derivative of provision. We don't have people walking around stealing and swinging bats at each other's heads. We have a police. We're relatively safe in the UK, despite all of the things that we are doing to make this place less safe. London is a great city, and despite its challenges, we're still safe. Therefore, protection is not really that necessary. We have a police, and we can pick up the phone and call a number, and there'll be someone there to help you. We're civilized. The function of our education system has raised us to live less like animals and to live more as communities. So we push aside all that provision and protection to one side, and a woman, therefore, is saying, well, what I really need is the number 4, which is actually a man's ability to profess his love through his presence. And if he can also be a priest, providing that priestly duties is within what I think is acceptable, then maybe I'll have that. I'm going to be talking about I'm going to be speaking to 2 separate groups as I move forward. The men, and I hope that women can understand how to take the information and recognize how they might be making poor decisions because they're not understanding, or they lack the understanding or the awareness of what a real manhood value is. And because they fail to separate 3 things: a male, his masculinity, and whether he becomes a man. So keep those 4 P's in mind. There's something that is always missing. There's another P that is missing, which if you included the P, you could say a manhood's value, or rather, a man's manhood value can be judged by 5 P's. I'm going to talk about the P that I think is the most important P and overshadows the other P's completely. And that is the only thing a woman should use in judging a man. It's the first P, but it's the P that is not considered, not discussed, and not used as part of the evaluation. The 4 P's used came from our traditional gender roles. Men had responsibilities, and therefore there were reasons for his actions. Those reasons were solidified because in the dating marketplace or in the relationship marketplace, there are rules of the game. And those rules determines the role he plays. So what you had is what I call 4 R's. Responsibility, reasons, roles and the rules of the game. And all of that placed men in a particular box and placed women in a particular box. Because we played separate and never intertwined roles, and because the rules were set in a manner that was respected by both sides, and because both parties had a responsibility to each other, therefore required the other party, they were interdependent, we had reasons to stay together. And so back in the day, a woman who wanted to get married, the men in the group or the men in the family will judge the other man on very simple manhood criteria. Can he provide for you? Can he protect you? And that was good enough. And let's assume he scored a 6 in provision. And let's assume he scored a 5 or 6 in protection. He would have a manhood value of a 6. His age played a part. I'm going to talk about this in a session that follows. To expect a man who is in his 20s, mid-20s, say 25, to be able to provide for a woman is fanciful. To expect a man who's 25 to be able to lead a woman, protect her, is also fanciful. This is why I use the number 35 as a marker to say men should not consider marriage until about 30. Consider, but they should not get married until 35 or over, or they should not go into a committed relationship until 35 and over. There's been so many social changes that have made men less mature. We've raised 2 or 3 generations of harder women and softer men. We live in a gynocentric society in the West. Most men are feminized. Most mothers have raised their sons without fathers being present, and so most young boys never grew up understanding masculinity or understanding the role of a man or even seeing a male in the family. Most mothers raise their daughters to be independent and raise their sons to be dependent on them. Most mothers raise their daughters to be go-getters and to strive for success. Most mothers subconsciously believed that they were fighting the patriarchy and therefore their sons had to pay for the sins of the fathers and the forefathers. So you find actually this discrepancy between the need for achievement, the need for success, and a huge gap between the women and the men. So what you're finding these days, the women come to the picture already accomplished. The men come to the picture feeling disheartened and unaware of who they are. Let me move, therefore, to something I think is necessary. In the sessions that I did many sessions ago, I talked about how in a relationship, falling in love is natural. Staying in love is unnatural. I'll say that again just to make sure that it's understood. Falling in love comes naturally. You see someone, you find them attractive, you find them compatible, you find that your spirit is drawn to them, mentally, spiritually, physically, you're connected with them. It's easy to fall in love. When both of you started a union and a relationship, assuming there's been consummation of the union in some manner, what you find is that staying in love, staying and loving that person becomes unnatural. It requires work. Staying in love requires work and effort. It requires wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, and hard work. It is work. In the same manner, when we talk about a man's value, manhood value, I like to separate 3 things, or 2 things specifically. It's very easy to distinguish a male from a female, visually. Most of what we call men should be labeled as male. You are a male from a natural creation. You are not a man from a natural creation. Being a male is natural, comes easy. You're born, you have play no part in that process, and you're just simply born into the world. It's easy. Becoming a man is unnatural and harder. You become a man, but you're born a male with potential. So, one of the aspects of a woman assessing a man's manhood value is to assess whether he has converted his potential to actuality. A difficult exercise, which is why, in choosing a mate, it's wise for the woman to use a father, the group, other men, the community, to assess the manhood value of the man she wants to choose. And it's also the same why between men, we very easily can come to a consensus about the value of another man based on whether we think he's just a male or whether he's journeyed through, we call it a rite of passage. You've journeyed through the process and you've overcome and you're now a man. But you go through a process, seeking, finding, and then becoming. Be, do, have. Most men in that process exhibit a masculinity or traits of masculinity that you will find amongst males, but you will also find amongst men. Women therefore are confused usually because they see traits that demonstrate masculinity and then mistake that for a high value of manhood and the becoming of a man. 35 is a marker. There are men who become men much earlier. There are men who, at 60 and 65, in my opinion, are still males. They haven't actually become men yet, despite chronologically being older. Now, the way you measure a man's value, let me get cut to the chase. And I talked about a P. What I consider to be the first P is purpose. Purpose. What is the man's purpose? Has he found his purpose? Does he have a purpose? P. And let me attach that P to the other 4 P's. Purpose, provision, protection, priestly duties, professing his love. Then you have a complete formula. And those can be used as shortcuts and heuristics for choosing a man's or assessing a man's value. A woman can do that very easily. Other men can do that very easily. But it requires going into a deeper dive to understand that purpose. Because in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, if I were to place those 4 items next to the number 5, or the first, which is purpose, so you have 5 P's. And if I was to assign a weighting, I would assign roughly about 70 to 85% towards purpose, and the rest I would assign across the other 4 items. And what this means is that purpose carries a much higher weighting with regards to a man's manhood value than all the other things. A man can be able to provide. A man can be able to protect you. A man could also be able to write you love poems and sing songs to you, play musical instruments. A man might be able to fake the priestly duties. But if he does not have purpose, if he doesn't know the reason for his existence, if he doesn't has a sense of who he is, you're choosing the wrong man. Because what you're going to find is that in the short term, it might seem great. In the long term, to medium to long term, he will self-destruct. Everything in life that we have created by our creativity, ingenuity, knowledge, wisdom, was made in such a manner that it was supposed to serve a function. A man has a function he has to play. That function is hidden in his purpose. I talked about going a layer deeper. Let me expand on that so you can understand why purpose is so crucial. A man's self-image, a man's self-identity, his sense of self-worth, his self-concept, a man's significance, a man's level of fulfillment, a man's feeling of uniqueness, a man's, you might say, joy of life comes not based on what you, the woman, has ascribed to him, not based on what his parents ascribed or gifted to him, not based on what his ethnicity or his heritage or his lineage have demanded of him, not based on what the nation state requires through force, threat, or coercion of him. All of that comes from one word: purpose. Purpose. If a man understands his reason. Mark Twain once said there are the two most important days of your life. The first being the day you were born. You're born a male. So being born a male is a blessing. It's an important day. The second day is the day you become a man. And that comes the day when you find out why you were born. Why is reason. I have a mouse. What's the purpose of this mouse? What is its function? What makes it unique? What was it manufactured to do? Purpose is how you rank your manhood value. Let me say something also. You don't choose your purpose. You discover your purpose. Purpose is so powerful and so important that in my first book, in describing how to find success, that was the first chapter in the book, Purpose. And how do you find that purpose? There is nothing so sad, and I have seen this, and I'm going to talk about, as we go further, how you tend to find most men get to a point in their lives and commit suicide. In part, it's because they have no purpose. They haven't discovered their purpose, and they do not know or have the awareness of what their purpose could be. Men go into depression. Here are some statistics, and this is accurate. It's not an opinion. In the UK, and actually this applies across the West on an aggregated basis, between 0 and 9, boys and girls commit suicide at a similar rate. Between 10 and 14, boys commit suicide at a rate 2 times that of girls. Between 15 and 19, 4 times. Between 20 and 25, 8 times. Between 25 and 30, almost 10 times. That number continues to increase until age about 30, 82, 81, given the life expectancy, and that number goes up to about 16, almost 20 times. As boys age, we kill ourselves much faster, using more lethal means, primarily because we do not know. Yes, there's a role that the lack of fathers play, but this connects back to the purpose of a man. We don't know our purpose. We don't know the purpose of men in our lives. We don't know the purpose of men in society. And we've changed society so much so that we simply say men and women are the same, and there is no difference. We curse at men who have standards and preferences. We praise women for their standards and preferences. The attack on masculinity and the male frame since the 1950s has been so relentless that in roughly a 75-year period, it would require at least 300 years of intense, you might say, focus and repair to bring us back to where we were at the end of the 1940 era. The baby boom generation did an enormous damage to the masculine frame. The reason most boys do not have a sense of purpose is because the sins of the fathers, the 2-3 generations past, baby boom generation, Generation X, and millennials have done more damage to the masculine frame and therefore done more damage to women finding good men than anything we could think about. This should be a national crisis in the West. It isn't. Now, I don't intend to make this a social debate or conversation, but let me bring this back to the conversation that I had, which is a man's value, the manhood value, comes from his purpose, because his purpose determines his self-worth and self-identity. A man who knows why he is born and why he is here understands who he is. He doesn't need the woman to give him value. Let me give you perhaps a clue for women. If you meet a man who considers you to be the most important thing in his life, you've met a man of low value. because he's placed you before his purpose, which means he's out of place. He's displaced himself from where he should be. A man's purpose comes first. His goals and dreams and aspirations come second. He comes third. You come fourth. A woman who chooses a man and finds that the man places her as number one has picked a man with a manhood value that is very low, certainly below average, because it's dysfunctional. And in the long run, in the short term, you feel important. In the long run, you will exit that relationship. Why? Because a man who is out of place is schizophrenic and dysfunctional. Out of presence or out of purpose always leads to self-sabotage in the long run. A man will not get his purpose from you, the woman. And any woman who finds a man who feels or thinks or hears the man say, "Since you came into my life, I have a new sense of purpose," you should run, because he's placed too much of a burden on you and he's out of function, he's out of place, he's out of alignment. Think about it this way. If you've driven a car that is out of alignment, the tires start to erode in a certain way. Eventually those tires will burst. Eventually you'll get into an accident. A man who is out of alignment will end up in a crash. It could be 5 years, it could be 6 months, it could be 10 years, it could be 14 years. But at some point, something will start to eat him on the inside. A man who starts a family too early and assigns his purpose to his family will certainly, we talk about midlife crisis for men, and people don't understand that people who have a sense of purpose do not go through a midlife crisis. Why? Because you know why you were born. And you're living each day according to what you were born to do. Now, along the way, you will play different functions and different roles. There's purpose, there is an assignment, there is a task. So at different stages of your life, you're playing different roles because there are different assignments and different functions and different responsibilities. So the key thing to understand from a manhood value perspective, society does not decide a man's purpose, despite our British government trying to decide what the purpose of a man should be. Your environment and your social group does not decide a man's purpose, despite female influences and female voices telling men what their purpose should be and how they should be and behave. A woman, whether you're a girlfriend, a partner, or a wife, does not decide on the man's purpose, despite your love and despite your influence. A man's children should not and will never determine a man's purpose. Think about this carefully. You can't have omelets without breaking eggs. So you can't say a family, his children are his sense of purpose, because that would imply that if the children were no longer around, he would have no purpose. And before the children came, he had no purpose. So what you're simply saying is, in effect, he is a product created to satisfy other people's happiness and therefore derive happiness in the process. Maybe. Society, social interactions do not determine a man's purpose. Remember, men, you're born a male. That's natural. That's the first part of Mark Twain's view. That's an important day of your life. The day you were born. The day you become a man, the day you discover your purpose, is the second most important day of your life. And what you find is, from that day forward, you get significance from that knowledge, and what you do, you get your fulfillment from that knowledge and discovering that purpose and what you do, you get your significance internally. You're self-sufficient. It's almost like a renewable energy. Think about having let's just assume that you could harness your energy from the sun. It will be self-replenishing on a daily basis. No effort. You're not burning fossil fuel. You're not using other low-grade or high-grade technology to generate electricity or energy. You're simply using a natural source of energy, the sun. Your purpose is like the sun in your life. It replenishes, it resuscitates you, it helps you recover, and it helps you rest. Men who have found their purpose live life on easy mode. Doesn't mean life is easy, but they are free, their sense of well-being and peace. Now, I'll talk about this in more detail in a few minutes, but keep that in mind, that whilst you may be born a male, you are not a man. You do not become a man when you turn 18. You're chronologically older. You are an adult, but you're still not a man. You do not become a man when you're 65. You're chronologically older, but it doesn't mean that you've become a man. Because until you discover your purpose, which then allows you to perform the other 4 Ps, you're living outside of your true essence. The 4 Ps are important: provision, protection, professing love, and the priestly duties. The reason I made reference to the fact that they only make up less than 15% of a man's overall manhood value is as follows. It would be the same as suggesting that a boy who is 16, who at that age cannot provide by virtue of education and not being able to work, and who cannot protect by virtue of being still very young, therefore who has no experience and therefore cannot provide the priestly duties by virtue of not being able to share a vision and teach, and therefore cannot love because he's underage. It would be the same as saying he has no value. The same boy can have a purpose, but not be able to provide the responsibilities that come with manhood, or that come with adulthood. Let me rephrase, that come with adulthood, and are more required of men who want to be in a family. If a man does not want to be a father and chooses to just be alone, for example, he wants to be a priest and he wants to be unmarried, it would be wrong to say that he has no purpose by the 4P standard, or has no value by the 4P process, because he's not providing for anyone but himself and refuses to have children. It would be wrong then to say, well, because he wants to be celibate, that he cannot profess his love to a woman and therefore he has no value. It would also be wrong to say, well, his priestly duties are just for his congregation and not directed at his loved ones. The same priest still has value because his choices may be hidden in his purpose. Can you now see why purpose is the most important thing with regards to choosing a man's manhood value? Your purpose determines your identity, your self-image. Now let me push this to one side and talk about the whole reason why we go through the non-sexual marketplace value assessment. I'm talking specifically and speaking specifically with regards to relationships. Because when we go into relationships, we are looking to meet and be with someone who we hope that we can spend the rest of our lives with. And we hope that I will last forever. That is usually the hope. The life expectancy of a woman is 84, 85 in the UK. The life expectancy of a man is roughly 82 years. If the average couple get married at 30, the woman gets married at 30 and he at 35, roughly. Or if there's a 7-year gap, he's 35 and she's 27. What the woman is in effect saying is, I've chosen to pair bond with someone who I will be with for almost 60 extra years. Think about that. It's too much of a burden to expect that the roles society has given him, the love that you have for him, will keep that flame burning all the way through. As a matter of fact, what the woman should be looking for is a man who has found his purpose, because if he's well rooted in his purpose, he will blossom. And he will go through the 4 seasons, winter. He will go through spring and summer and autumn, and in the midst of all the seasonal changes, sometimes he will wither, sometimes he will blossom, sometimes he will grow, but he will be well rooted. And you come 30 years, like an oak tree, it's rooted properly and it stands firm. Why? Purpose. So a woman should always choose a man based on his purpose, because that purpose determines his identity. I see a lot of young boys these days, and there's an observation that I should share, which is there is a necessity for young men to find their identity. Ideation and individualization, very important. But adaptability should not become a lifestyle. It's necessary at certain phases. When you go from, say, 14 and you go towards 17, 18, 19, then you change, you transition. You're 18, between 18 and 20s, there's another change. Between, say, 20 and 25, there's another change. But you're going through phases of life in leaving family behind to form your identity. People form their identities in the absence of their purpose from other groups or the environment. And I have seen of late a lot of young men who are changing almost on a weekly basis. Why? Because they have no fathers. And therefore, the saying, train up a child in the way that he or she should grow, and when they grow, they'll never depart from it. Your father does not give you your purpose. He gives you a temporary identity. Your purpose actually replaces the identity that you were given from the family. Your father's role and your mother's role is to observe you at a young age, to understand your inclinations, to understand what makes you excited, to understand what I call ruminations of that purpose, and to spot that, and to nurture you in that pathway. And if you come to acceptance that this is what I'm supposed to do, to nurture you in such a way that when you grow, you don't depart from that purpose. Not to tell you who to become, but to observe you and guide you into who you should be. Your purpose is something you discover. Other people do not assign a purpose to you. Other people do not determine by opinion or legislation or vote what your purpose should be. You discover it. You don't choose it. You discover it. And a father and mother at an early age will guide you towards becoming, blossoming into who you should be. And then you build on that. And I see a lot of young men these days change almost on a weekly basis. No fathers, raised by mothers primarily, not aware of what masculinity is all about, journeying from male to manhood alone, but being taught and installed or having an installation system of a feminine nature in that process. So they're confused. They get to their 30s and they're confused. They don't know what it means to be a man. And they are looking for other men, sadly picking up the wrong role models. One week is that person, the other week is that person, the other week is that person. Why? Because they were not trained on how to be discerning. They were not trained on how to use their intellectual faculties. They were not trained with a role model in place. There were no good men in the communities. So whilst the father may have been absent, he wasn't trained to be a husband, he wasn't trained to be a man, and he wasn't led in the right pathway. A manhood value is important from a female's perspective because a woman, you're given the most important part of who you are. Your womb, your body, your emotions, and your life. And you're bringing it together to pair bond with someone. The way a man explains his purpose is through his vision. Let me say that again. In assessing a man's purpose, it's hard, but doable. But one of the ways you can ascertain whether you've met a man with purpose is to see how purpose births a vision. That vision births a discipline. That discipline creates a plan. That plan is based on a goal. That goal has a strategy. The strategy comes with tactical steps. Those tactical steps have routines. Those routines lead to rituals. The rituals are manifested in daily actions. So, you begin with the end in mind, the vision, and you compare it to the daily actions. You don't watch what people say, you look at what they have done. And you correlate between what they say and have done over iterations. What did you do a year ago? What did you do the year before? What did you do 4 or 5 years ago, to see whether there's been progressive realization of a worthy ideal? He knows where he is. He knows where he's trying to get to. Is he moving confidently in the direction of that dream? You see, Henry David Thoreau said that if a person would advance confidently in the direction of their dreams and endeavor to live the life that they have imagined, they will meet with success, unexpected, in uncommon hours. In other words, if you know your purpose, move towards a purposeful lived or purpose-driven life, someday you'll meet with success. So in assessing a person, sit down with them and you say, tell me your vision, tell me your dream, show me your plan, show me the goals, show me the results and outcomes, show me the strategy, show me the tactical steps you can take, show me the routine, where are the rituals, and what do you do daily? And with that, a woman can simply, if she does not have men around her to help her score a manhood value, she can put a number to say, well, this is the progressive realization of his goals. He has a vision. I am stunned at how many women can take their whole self, as beautiful as they are, and gift it to a man with no purpose, no vision. Let me say something perhaps that I've said in other sessions. Women are gatekeepers to their emotions, their body, and their womb. Men are gatekeepers to relationships and marriage. We decide who will go on one knees, both knees, no knees, and we propose to. We decide who we'll die for, who we profess our love for. We decide who we journey through life from one part of the wilderness to the other with. Two separate functions, two different roles. A woman's value comes inherently as part of her birth, but when she turns 18, chronologically becoming an adult. So a woman who is 18 and beautiful and youthful and a virgin, purity, chastity, and all of what men want, has a much higher value than a man who is the same age. And even has more value than a man perhaps who's 30 years, who is a millionaire. A man has to go forward and make himself. So he goes from male to manhood. And that process requires time, effort, understanding, learning, education, insight, wisdom. So he has to become that man. The woman is usually born the woman. From 18, she has, on a sexual marketplace basis and in the dating marketplace and relationship marketplace, she has a much higher value, all things remaining equal. To see that woman take everything that she is, purity, virginity, chastity, beauty, and gift it to a man who has no vision, no purpose, no goals, no dreams, it's really sad. And so what women have to do is learn, when the date begins, you might like him, his sexual marketplace value from your assessment might be a 10. He is attractive. But if he has no vision, has no purpose, no dreams or goals, he is perfect for another woman, but not you. Now, we go back to the 4 Ps. Do not mistake the fact that he might be high in the sexual marketplace perspective, and he might be able to provide for you because he has money. Having money plays no significance in a man's manhood value. Let me say that again. I'm going to discuss and deal with what I call EIV, economic intrinsic value, which is how most men are judged based on being success or resource objects. However, let me say to you, in case I do not have the opportunity to say this, a man's manhood value is the most important metric for assessing a man for a potential mate, not his economic intrinsic value. Despite what we see in the West and even in the East, despite the agreement between both the traditional and the modern, that a man's ability to provide and protect through his resources is the most important, it is wrong. Here is the reason. Nothing stays the same. Whenever we put our identity in something that is external to us, recognizing that the one constant in life is change, we are bound for an identity crisis. It's like watching slow motion train wreck. Let me say that again, because most men make this mistake. When men base their identity on their accomplishments or achievements or anything external to who they are, they will go through a crisis, not just a crisis of confidence, but a crisis of life. We've seen many people kill themselves. We've seen many people commit suicide. Why? Changing identity. There was a perception, an opinion, a reputation, external to who they really were, but they had built themselves on that external reputation, such that when that reputation changed, when that role changed, when that job or career disappeared, they lost a sense of who they were. I'm going to use myself. I try not to, but let me use myself as a good example. Most people who have met me will tell you in an intimate setting, if you meet me and you ask me, what do I do? It's a question I find it very hard to answer for a number of reasons. But primarily, I like the word. I'm a teacher. When I met my beloved, when I did, most women who I have been intimate with will tell you I prefer the word teacher because at the core, it connects with my purpose. I love to teach. But if you put that aside, someone who was a chartered engineer for 15 years, I found that there is so much connection to titles. Now, I remember many years ago, this particular project that I had, and working with a team, very huge team, must have been perhaps a 200 or 300 million pound project. And you're working with different people, architects and project managers and contractors and quantity surveyors and other engineers and those who are supposed to be other key stakeholders who may not be part of the main project team. And I always had a point of, in every organization, you have what's called a signature to your emails. And it was usually your name, your title, your qualifications in abbreviations. So if you had a BSc or if you had an MBA, you would put after your name. And so I always had three signatures. One was my full signature with my name, my qualifications, my title, and my position in the business. The second was an abbreviated version, which was just my name and the business. In other words, the business. And the third was actually just my name, my first name. And I found it because I never identified with titles and roles, boxes, that whenever I replied, and I would just simply put my first name, signature 3. So if I sent an email, signature 3 was the default. And I recall particularly on this one occasion, as a high-flying director working for, as one of the key members on the project, working for another company. I think he was a project manager. And there had been exchanges in between different parts of the members of the team, including my team. And I had 2 people working with me on the project, reporting to me, and they would propose something, but he had a thing of saying, well, I reject this. Technically, he wasn't supposed to, but people trying to assert. And on this particular occasion, I remember replying and simply saying, what the engineers have said to you before are correct, and I think you should proceed, you're just delaying the project. And his response was, because he had seen a response from someone who had been copied in or CC'd into all of the exchanges, but had never responded. And all he had was my name, nothing else. And he obviously knew the company, and he said, well, I like this authorized by the director of the company. So I replied, and I simply changed my signature to signature 1. And I said, consider it authorized. Now, what is fascinating is how people's perception change. That people don't judge you based on the technical and the substance. We judge based on titles and roles. Same person, within a few minutes. How could one person's perception change? Simply because they saw a title. Why? Because titles determine people's perceptions. Same person, he then felt, okay, well, I'm dealing with someone who's a comparable level as I am or higher in a big organization, and therefore I agree to what he says now. Before that, you're just a person. You have no title. The reason I use this example is to simply say that whatever defines you limits you. Purpose is the most important part of manhood because it doesn't have a limit. A father has a limit. If you lose your son, you're no longer a father. A son has a limit. A husband has a limit. If you're divorced, does it mean you lose your value? Provision comes with a job. If you lose the job and cannot provide, does it mean you're no longer a man? I explain this to simply say that I have always never been connected with roles and titles. I don't place my identity in things that are external to me. Now, this transition, I moved from engineering, retired from engineering, and moved into investing. And in between both, you will seldom see me talk about my engineering career. I'm still a chartered engineer, but I've moved on to other things. I moved into consulting and teaching and life coaching, but at the same time, I never talked about myself as being a coach or a consultant. Why? Whatever defines you limits you. Then I transitioned and moved into investing full time. But in the process, I had written 7 books over the years, but you would never hear me call myself an author, despite having written 7 books on various topics. I am a full-time investor. That is what I do. But I don't define investing as my core purpose, despite it being the main source of my income. The reason being, whatever defines you limits you. So many years ago, people said, what do you do? And I just simply said, I'm a teacher, because at the core, my purpose is the anchor of what I do. All the other titles that I have had over the years were assignments. They were roles, they were functions. And whenever I leave, it doesn't change my manhood. Just think about this. You go from being a chartered engineer, very established, very successful, and you leave. Most people go into a crisis because they do not know how to start from zero in a field that they have never actually experienced. When I went into consulting, I started from nothing. When I moved to writing, I started from nothing. When I moved to investing, I started from nothing. I had to go and retrain myself completely in finance, account, economics, and to be able to succeed in all those areas required work. But I do not define myself by any of such accolades. Why? It's not me. My identity is not hidden. My significance, my fulfillment, my sense of uniqueness, my self-image, my self-concept, my self-worth is not hidden in any of those titles. It's hidden in my purpose. Connected with my purpose is teaching. So when I started teaching, I taught when I had 1 student, and I teach when I have 1 student and even no students. Why? It's part of my purpose. It's inherently part of my sense of life and meaning. Men, you have to discover your purpose to transition from being just a male to being a man. Now here's the key thing. I felt drained in all of those other roles that I played. Why? It's the same as a fish. Taking a fish out of water, it struggles. Putting a bird in a cage, it struggles. But I can play those functions, but provided I have at the foundation and building all of that on my core purpose, then I am replenished from a natural source, which is my purpose, which is like the sun, that replenishes me and ensures that I can teach. Now, I have been teaching for many years. There are some of my videos that go back decades that are not on YouTube. But think about that. There were times when I remember where I would have a session in a studio or in a class or in a hotel hall, and there would be 1 student. And I taught as though there were 1,000 students. I've never been inspired by crowds or followers. I've never been inspired by accolade or praise. Why? A fish does not need to be told that it's a fish and that it swims. The fish just is. My purpose fuels every part of my life and therefore ensures, and here's the key thing, that any woman who has come into my life and any man who has come into my life has felt safe. Why? Most important was the day I was born, and the second, the day I understood why. It means that you were safe as a woman around me because I understand my purpose. And you will be safe around any man who has come to the awareness of his purpose. Anything that he's doing that is greater than himself protects you, provides for you, and ensures that the union that you choose to have with the person exists in a blissful state, in a peaceful state, and without contention. Provision, protection, priestly duties, and professing his love are things that a man can do. But some men may choose not to. It doesn't make them less of men, and it doesn't mean their manhood value is lower. Purpose is the key, and I hope in the session that has gone on today that you've picked up some things that could help you start to assess a man's value in a different way. I'd like to talk about something that I will refer to as one of the key benefits of coming to the awareness of who you are. I'm going to go slightly tangential in a manner that perhaps not everyone accepts or believes. I respect your position nonetheless. Fundamentally, why we get this wrong is because most people think as follows. Most people believe that we're simply physical beings. I don't disagree with that, except for the fact that that is how they choose to lead their lives, and that's fine if it works for them. I believe, on the other hand, that we are spiritual beings. We live in a physical body, and we've been gifted with an intellect. Now, if you accept everything I've just said so far, spiritual, intellect, physical, it means that there are three parts to who we are. Our personalities come not just as a monolith, but comes in as a triunial nature. We are spiritual beings. Purpose connects with spirit. This is the key part of the whole process. Spirit just is. So something animates this body you see. This body you see is not me. It's my physical, you might say, housing, the way I'm wearing this jacket. But there's a spirit inside me, and that spirit has been gifted with a purpose. I live in a physical body to enjoy life. At some point, I will leave this physical body. But to enable me succeed and go from where I am to where I want to be, there's a bridge that exists. It's called my intellect that enables me to achieve things that I cannot achieve in the physical plane, but I cannot represent on the spiritual plane. And that bridges the gap between both that enables me to achieve much more. That intellect, in that intellect, we are able to regulate our emotions through the use of our intellect. This is where the mind comes into the picture. A manhood value, in addition to being purposeful, and in addition to being rooted in his purpose, you have to find a man who understands what I've just shared, the three parts of his personality. But fundamentally, assuming he doesn't believe in what I believe, and we put aside the spiritual completely, he might be more scientific. What I would simply say to you, that one is studying the forces around and the other studies the forces within. There are only two ways, generally speaking, to explain who you are: theology or science. Now, if you're atheist, you might decide none of the two apply. In any case, we put all of that aside and we simply say, let's just assume that you do not accept the three parts of what I think is fundamental to our personalities, and therefore fundamental to what will be your manhood value. Let's assume that you only believe in two, physical and intellect. Now, you cannot deny that you have an intellect as a man, and women cannot deny that they have an intellect, and that men have intellect. The key part then that I hope you take away is as follows. Our physical body has limits. Our mind and our intellect do not have limits. We can achieve much more. Therefore, in choosing a man with a high NSMV, non-sexual marketplace value, or manhood value, you can defer to his intellectual prowess. And by intellectual prowess, I'm not referring to how intellectual he is or she is. I'm simply saying, has he developed the faculties of his mind so that he can attain whatever he wants and help you attain whatever you want without violating the rights of other people? That is a man with a high manhood value, if the answer is yes. In other words, as a male, you have senses, 5 senses. You have sight, you can smell, you can taste, you can hear. So you have 5 senses to who you are. And you can smell. 5 senses. They come naturally as part of your physical body. Your intellectual faculties sit dormant. Those have to be developed. Imagination, perception, will, memory, intuition. With your imagination, you can create a future. This is where the vision and the purpose comes in. You can see a future that doesn't exist. We see things first before we create them. The things that we see come from things that were unseen. With your imagination, you can pre-play the future. Your memory, you can replay the past. With your intuition, you can sense and you can read. You can interpret feelings of energy and vibration. With your perception, you can stand on one side of the fence and you can look towards one side and say, I can see. And you can look to the other side and you can say, I can also see, like a coin. Every coin has 3 sides, heads, tail, and the edge. Perception allows you to stand on the edge, so you can see to one side and see to the other side. With your focus and your will, you can direct your attention towards one thing. This one thing I do, forgetting the things that are to my left or to my right or behind me, I move towards my goal. Purpose, individual, male, manhood. Focus enables you to stay focused on who you want to be and to move in that direction. Your intellectual faculties sit dormant. They have to be trained. Like a muscle, they have to be used. A man with a high manhood value is one who has developed the faculties of his mind that he can achieve whatever he wants and can help you achieve as a woman whatever you want without violating the goals, the needs, and the pursuits of other people. This is where I bring today's session to a close by going a little bit further as follows. Most men are unaware of who they are from an intellectual perspective because most people have not been taught how to think or how to use their intellectual faculties. With your reasoning faculty, you think. You can think deductively and you can think inductively. So most people operate from a position of ignorance. Ignorance leads to worry and doubt. Anyone who's ignorant will get to a point where they are worried and they're doubtful, which is why most women, in choosing spouses, approach men from a place of ignorance. You do not know who we are as men. And most men choose women from a place of ignorance. They do not know who women are. Ignorance will lead to worry and doubt. Decisions that we made or we make from a place of worry and doubt will breed fear. Fear in our system, and fear is a very, very difficult state to be in on a long-term basis, which is why if you come from a place of fear, which has come from a place of worry and doubt, based on your ignorance, you will find that you go into anxiety. So the reason most women fail in choosing good men is because they start from a place of ignorance. The men themselves are coming from a place of ignorance. It is the worry and doubt. Transcribes into fear. Fear, and I'm talking fear, is all in your mind. It's all in your head. It has to manifest itself through the physical body. Remember, fear is on the intellectual plane. It has to manifest itself through the physical plane, the body, which is manifested through anxiety. If you've ever been anxious, what is the natural thing? Anxiety is not expressed. I don't know people who come and say, I feel anxious. I want to express myself. We have conditioned men to suppress their anxiety. We have conditioned women to suppress, but not to the same extent as men. So women are more able to express and seek help. Men suppress their anxiety. Think about putting a book on the table and another book on the table, and then you just force that book down. When suppressed, it'll lead to depression. Now, I'm saying all of this to explain a concept, which is, if you're not able to choose a man based on his manhood value properly, you're likely going to find and meet a man who's in a place where he doesn't know who he is because he doesn't understand his purpose and is living from a place of the physical plane and hasn't developed his intellectual faculties, doesn't know how to use his mind, and so goes through life, puts in his identity on things that are external that limit him, such that whenever there is a change, there's a crisis based on ignorance, leading to worry and doubt, causing fear, leading to anxiety, which he suppresses by his natural state, which is why the ratio of suicide increases for men over time compared to women. Suppressed, what you will find is that lead to depression. Men who do not know their purpose and men who have a low manhood value are on the fast track towards depression. Depression will lead to disease, disintegration, and death. This is why I said the manhood value approach is the most important way a woman chooses a man, and is the most important way men should assess other men. Now let's flip that. Again, we'll put aside spirituality and the spiritual side. We're only dealing with the physical and the intellect. What is the antidote? Assuming you find yourself in this predicament, let me leave you with something. The polar opposite of ignorance is knowledge. This conversation that I'm sharing with you, I share this from a place of a teacher because I'm trying to provide a different set of knowledge on the table to enable you think differently. And if for whatever reason the results you've been getting are not what you really want long term, then perhaps you can try this. Knowledge is the opposite of ignorance. But to get knowledge, you have to study. It comes from information. I'm going to talk about 3 words: knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. And you will see how all this connect. Knowledge comes from study, and it's awareness that creates the opportunity for you to have high understanding. You have to study. So a woman choosing a man with a high manhood value is a man who has a passion and a pursuit for knowledge. The priestly duties of a man comes from his ability to teach, to share. Men are the first people who teach about culture. The man is the first teacher. Lots of people get it wrong. The woman transmits that culture and scribes part of that culture, but she doesn't teach. The man is the first teacher. He becomes a teacher by being passionate about learning and wisdom, which means he's seeking and learning, and is the first teacher because he's the one who understands his vision and therefore can teach and show why his plan should be accepted by the lady, why she should join him in this adventure. By study, you develop understanding. Understanding leads to faith. Now remember, on one side you have fear, coming from worry and doubt and ignorance. On the opposite side you have faith. 2 F's, faith and fear. Faith comes by what you hear. Faith also leaves by what you hear. Fear comes by what you hear. Fear leaves by what you hear. What bridges the two is what I call displacement, the law of displacement. I can walk into this space and I can switch up a light socket. And if I did so in the middle of the night, the darkness in the room will be displaced by the light. If I walk out of the room and I turn back that switch off, the darkness displaces the light. Faith displaces fear. Those who are in a state of faith go through life in a different manner. So rather than have fear that leads to anxiety, faith leads to well-being. A man with a high manhood value is one who has good well-being, spiritually, intellectually, or mentally and physically. Doesn't mean we don't have ailments. We're humans. We age and we die. But you find that faith has to be expressed. This is the key thing. Anxiety has to be suppressed from a man's perspective. Faith has to be expressed. The expression of faith as a result of being in a state of well-being positions you, rather than being depressed, you're in a state of acceleration. You find a man who have high manhood value, who have found their purpose. It's as though they're walking through life gliding. Not moving too fast, but just gliding. Life is easy. Life is in easy mode. Why? They are at ease. A man who's found his purpose is at peace with himself. He doesn't look to opinions. He doesn't look to other people's identities. He doesn't look to society's preferences. He is who he is. You take him from one location to another and he says, I am who I am. The accolades, the titles, the qualifications, and all the things that we use to define men, to put men in the traditional box of provider, protector, are not needed if you understand your purpose. You are at ease, and therefore what you have, rather than disintegration, you have a life of growth. And here's the key part of this whole process. In the session that follows, I'm going to talk about reproductive fertility value. In a man's loins, we carry about 3 to 4 generations. A man with a high manhood value, who has found his purpose, who's living from a place of peace and significance, who understands his uniqueness and understands what gives him fulfillment, who has an identity and self-image, who has come from a place of passion for knowledge, who through study has developed understanding, has wisdom, and therefore has faith, expresses that faith through his body and around his environment, moves himself into a position of life and growth, guarantees one thing, that the seed that the woman chooses to bring into the next generation will have blessings. Why? Father was at ease. The seed was good. The seed had faith. Therefore, the loins that come, or the generations that come from that woman, will be good seed because it's come from good soil. Now let me summarize today's session as saying as follows. The non-sexual marketplace value of a man can be assessed. We have dealt with just one, manhood value. There's another part that deals with a man's character and how to assess a man's character. There's another part that deals with a man's integrity and how a man should have integrity between his words and himself. As a matter of fact, I use the concept that, like the triunion nature of who you are, your word should be as good as yourself and your presence. So when someone meets you, and for example, and I've had this occur in several stages in my life, where people would drop a contract, I would shake hands. And I've had people say, are you sure you want to do this? And my response is, well, it's only money. But your word, if your word doesn't, and is not consistent with who you are, then it's not my problem. Nature has a way of, through the karmic process, evening out those who are dispossessed. I've done several deals, handshake. Why? Word of mouth. That's what I said I would do. I don't have to put it in writing. Why? Because I said I would do it. My word and myself are one. And by giving you my word, I limit who I am and myself. I have to be consistent with what my words are. So you can judge a man's non-sexual marketplace value under the integrity front. You can do so from a servant spirit. You can do so from things such as whether he was raised to be a man, such as did he come from a two-parent family, with a family with a masculine and feminine avatars portrayed? Did he learn, did he see what it means to be a man and how to treat a woman? All of these things can be used to assess a man's non-sexual marketplace value. Today's session, I focus primarily on manhood value. I think it is the most important, but there are other things to assess a man by with regards to non-sexually. I hope today's session has been useful. In the session that follows, I'm going to speak about your reproductive fertility value. And then finally, I'll speak about the economic intrinsic value. When you aggregate all of them, you have sexual marketplace value, non-sexual marketplace value, reproductive fertility value, and economic intrinsic value. These are ways that men can assess their value from a man's perspective, but also women can also assess a man's value based on what they want. Women pay a much higher penalty on childbirth, and they pay a higher penalty in getting the decisions wrong at the early stages of their lives. So a woman has to make sure that if you choose to lay with someone, SMV is not the right thing to use, because if for some reason something happens and you end up pregnant, the last thing you want is to be pregnant by someone who's a thief, someone who's a robber, someone who has a very low manhood value or low non-sexual marketplace value. Therefore, I like to distinguish between the dating marketplace and the relationship marketplace. However, it is very important that you understand that character, generally speaking, is one of the most, and character is a euphemism for non-sexual marketplace value, just in the same way as manhood is a euphemism for non-sexual marketplace value, just in the same way as integrity and hardworking is a useful euphemism for non-sexual marketplace value. You should aggregate all of them, but in any case, a woman should always choose a man based on his character. She should choose a man based on his manhood first, before she starts to entertain his ability to provide, his ability to protect, his ability to profess his love, purpose. If you are dating a man who does not have a purpose, you are in trouble long term. If he does not find that purpose. If you are dating a man who does not want to lead a purpose-driven life, you are in trouble if you choose to pair bond with him long term. If you're dating a man who has no idea about what a purpose should be, has no vision, has no plans, has no goals, is not disciplined, doesn't have a routine, does not have tactics to get to that goal, it'll be the same as giving pearls to swines. You're giving yourself to someone who's not deserving of your glory as a woman. Now, I hope today's session has been useful.